All right, welcome back. Let's jump in now and start looking at these sequential function charts. These are pretty cool. They can do all kinds of neat stuff as long as that neat stuff is in a rigidly defined sequence. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and create a new program, reversion 20, and I'll just call this SFC1. And I want to put that on the desktop just like I've been doing everything. Let's go ahead and take that. First thing I want to do is I'm going to come over here to main program and I'm going to create a new routine. That new routine will be my SFC, and it's already selected as the type, and I want that to be in main. So let's go ahead and hit OK, and here it is. So when we come in here and we create this new SFC, we get this little box with a plus sign, or it looks like a robot. I don't know what that is, but let me explain what you're looking at here. This right here, this little square, is called a step. Below it, this little plus sign looking thing is called a transition. And if I were to come up into the menu, I've got an icon up here that looks basically the same, and it says step plus transition. If I click that, I get another one, and you can see I also have just a box, just a step, and then just a plus sign, just a transition. So I can go ahead and just add one of those or the other anywhere I need it. You see I can branch out, so I could create something like that if I needed to. And that would typically be under a step. So if I put one more step, and then I could go ahead and diverge. Now what I'm doing here is I'm creating a chain. And you're looking at this and say, yeah, I see you clicking the buttons, I see the logic going together, but I have no idea what that is. Now let me show you. This step, think of that as a stage of a process. So whenever I turn the machine on, perhaps I start here. Then something happens which is called a transition. And when that thing happens, I go from this step up here, step 0, to step 1. And I stay in step 1 until my next transition occurs, and this condition becomes true and causes me to transition into step 2. And then from there, let me go ahead and put a couple more steps below these transitions. Then one of two different transitions happens here. Either this becomes true or this becomes true, in which case I go into either this step or this step. So you can kind of see where this is going now. This is creating a process flow for the machine. It goes from step 0 invariably into step 1. It never goes from step 0 straight to step 2. You can see the way I've got this built, that's impossible. So now that we've got these steps, we've got these transitions, we know what we're doing. We're flowing from the top down. What are these steps? Because right now, a step is meaningless. Well, in this step, it's going to contain actions. So if I come up here, I can click on this action button, and then I can define inside of this box actions that this step is going to take. On top of that, if I click into this properties button, you can see I've got all kinds of different configuration that I can put onto one of these steps. And when you see everything you can do with a step, it's actually pretty impressive. You can set times for how long this step will run. So just like a timer, I can go ahead and put in a preset of so many milliseconds, and I can make this thing run for so long. I can also check my timer and see how much time has gone by anywhere else in the program. So if I'm also running ladder logic with my sequential function chart, or I'm using some other paradigm, or I want to display on an HMI how long I've been in step 1, well, I've got a timer word associated with this step. So you see right here where this step has a name, step_000. Steps are actually data types. Those actually show up in my tag database. So I can go to an HMI or elsewhere in the program, and once I've created this step, I can access the data from this step. I can look at the timer max and see what the longest this step has ever run actually is. I can access the count, and I can see how many times this step has run. And that count has to be manually reset in your program. So if you wanted to count how many times step 000 executes in an hour, then all you have to do is reset this count once an hour, and you'll always be able to see that as it progresses, over time. It's pretty cool. On top of that, I want to show you up here at type, we have two different things. We have normal and initial. Within one of these chains, you can only have one single block that's set up as initial. What that means is when I'm in the main routine over here and I call on SFC, when I come in here to start this, where does it begin? Does it begin down here on step 2? Does it begin down here in step 4? Well, typically you're going to put your first step up at the top, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Sometimes your process starts somewhere in the middle, but that's not how you draw it, and that's okay. You define the initial step. That's where it's going to start whenever this SFC is executed. Then from there, it's going to take the next transition below it, and it's going to follow the rest of the chain's order. So if I set this as the initial step and hit OK, and I try to come back into properties, you see it's still the initial step. But if I came down here to step 2, and I decided to set that as the initial step, you see it'll let me do that. But whenever I come back up here to step 0, you see now it's no longer the initial step. So it'll let you set other things as the initial step, but it's clearing that property off of the old ones. So it's important to actually define one of your steps within your chain as the initial step. Now, aside from all these time functions up here, you see that we can set a preset. Well, we can also create time-based alarms inside of each step. So if I say, I always want step 0 to run between 10 and 30 seconds, I can put a limit low in here of 10,000 milliseconds, which would be 10 seconds. And then I could set my limit high to be 30,000, which is 30 seconds. And anytime this step transitions before it's been running for 10 seconds, or after it's been running for longer than 30 seconds, it's going to give me an alarm. So that's another neat thing that you can do when you're using steps that are time critical. So for right now, I'm not going to worry about setting any of these. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of there. And while I'm in this step, you see I can take these different actions and I can write out expressions, text, that will actually define what these actions are that it's taking. And we'll see that as we actually start using this. But for right now, I do want to click into the action properties, and I want to show you that just like in the steps, we actually have some neat little configurations for how these actions run. So we can come in here, for instance, to qualifier, and we've got a handful of different options that tell us how this step is actually supposed to run. So for instance, the way that it is right now, this is on N. What that means is this action is going to start happening as soon as we go into step 0, and it's going to keep happening for as long as we're in step 0. But maybe I don't want that. Maybe I just want this P1, pulse rising edge. That means as soon as we come into step 0, this is going to happen one time for one scan only, and then it's not going to happen again even if we stay in step 0 for 10 seconds and thousands more scans. Falling edge, same thing, but now that's not going to happen until the very end of step 1. So once we hit our transition, right before we leave step 0, we're going to take this action for just one scan and then move on. So we've got a handful of different options. Most of the time you're not going to need most of those, but you can investigate those on your own and see what they do, because there really is a lot of power in these actions. Preset, of course, we can set timer, we can access and see how long we've been taking this action. Count, self-explanatory, how many times we've actually done it. Indicator tag lets you actually create a display for this action while it's executing. So if you don't want to just see a textual expression in the box, you want to see something a little more clever, you can actually configure that here. But, most of the time when we come into this action properties, the only thing that we're usually going to be configuring is probably the qualifier, and that's about it. And most of the time, we might not even be doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here. So let's say once I get done with this chain, I come down here, and if I get to this, I want to go ahead and transition back up to the top. And then if I get to the end of this step, then maybe whenever I transition out, I'm going to come over here and click stop. And that means that's going to be the end. This chain will not run anymore until it's been executed once again. So that's a basic structure of what one of these chains looks like. And in the next lecture, we're going to jump back in and we're going to actually start working on creating some parts of our pump and tank program using sequential function charts. That way you'll kind of get a feeling for what these are good at and what these are not good at. And in our first example, I'm going to basically try to push this thing beyond what it's really good for, just so you can get an example of, wow, there are some things that you probably just shouldn't do with a sequential function chart. So see you in the next.